Now, for Australia, remember, Dr. Philip Lowe.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. There'll be no interest rate rises in Australia until 2024. We called that very well, and obviously RBA got that very wrong. Michelle Bullock, I think, has actually done a reasonable job coming in, and I think has been under immense political pressure. What we have is a situation where we have a federal government that is spending, as we've alluded to previously, and they want the RBA to cut interest rates. But until you put a lid on the spending and injecting all of that new money into the economy, it's going to be a very tricky thing for the RBA to cut rates. They won't bend to political will, and I think Michelle Bullock's done a very good job of standing up to Dr. Chalmers and his desire to see that interest rate cut. And the downside to all of this, of course, is that anyone that's got a mortgage is stuck with higher repayments, which is a contributing factor to the cost of living crisis for people. And people do want to see those rates cut so that they can get some opportunity to breathe and have some financial relief. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show. This week we are doing a year in review. Very, very important part of the year, and there's been some massive things politically, economically, socially, and it's great to take a little bit of time to look back on them and see the impact they've had on markets. It's a bit of a fun episode, a lot of ground to cover, so make sure you enjoy the program, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and as always, my offsider and co-host, Mitchell Olarenshaw.
AB, so good to be here. One of our favourite episodes. It's our yearly tradition, and that is the year in review. Here we are, December 23rd, a couple of days away from Christmas, but gee whiz, when you look back at this year and you go through some of the major economic and political topics and events that occurred, it's just crazy.
It's extraordinary, actually, and you try and go back through in your mind, okay, what are some of the things that have gone on? Look in your journal, see some of the things that you've noted down, and it has just been a mammoth year of headlines in every way, which way, shape and form that you can imagine. And against that backdrop, what an incredible year it's been from a trading perspective. You know, we've got the S&P, what's it up, 20-something for the year?
At the time of this recording, about 27% up for the year.
27% for the year, and 51 record highs this year, I think.
51 record closes, and at this stage, more record closes than we've had weeks of this year, which is just nuts, really.
Strong market, and here is the folly of just using indicators to help you with your trading. If you just relied on RSI, it would have been overbought all year and you would have stayed out.
Oh yeah, overbought, overvalued, whatever you want to call it. It's been a great money-making opportunity for good reason, because companies have been extremely strong. They've grown their earnings, and we've seen inflation come down lower, which has been the two major talking points.
And I suppose more of the same next year. I mean, statistically, S&P 500 normally puts on average, I think it was about 12% a year first year of a new presidential cycle.
About 11.3% on average, 12 months post an election.
Bodes well for markets, more of it to come next year.
It does.
Let's dive in. It has been crackers. There's been so much massive stuff. So what do you got for us?
Well, I mean, I think the first one that springs to my mind, this would have been sort of April, May. We had a budget surplus, which was the second one that we've seen in 2 years out of the Australian government.
Yeah, short-lived, I would suspect, in terms of surplus. Find a way of spending that money pretty damn quick.
It was $9.3 billion. They couldn't have gone through that too quickly, could they?
A couple of days, I should think. A couple of days on the pokies down in Canberra, and that'll be well chewed up. And I think, you look at it, and part of the reason for a budget surplus, it's certainly not been because of any belt tightening on the part of the Commonwealth government or indeed the states, where spending has been rampant. Hence why we've had a situation where interest rates haven't moved this year, or at least been cut. But what we also have had, where at the start of the year in particular, was a very, very strong economy where particularly corporate tax offered an opportunity to be big collections for the tax office and obviously the Commonwealth revenue line. I think that's starting to shift a little bit. I mean, we've talked about a softer outlook for markets for next year, particularly in regard to Australia, slowing economy. And I think that's going to go a long way to maybe curbing the notion of there being a surplus next year, that's for sure.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? I think just more generally speaking, the last 2 years, it almost feels like everyone all of a sudden is now paying attention to who's in politics, who state government is, what the RBA is doing, what they're actually saying at the RBA meetings, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, it didn't seem to be that important.
No, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I think we're in a very different space too, economically. And people, when times are good, probably become less granular in the way that they look at things. we are in a situation where people are quite aware of the largesse of government, and we're going into 25, of course, which I would suspect is going to be an election year. And you can only imagine the government showbag handouts that are going to be thrown out there in an effort to buy votes. Cynical as that may sound, it's likely to be the reality. So any notion of any further budget surplus, I think, is more, well, this budget surplus already been evaporated anyway as we record this, but most certainly will be gone. And I think just on that, because it is a talking point, and hence why we're rattling through it now, there is a flip side to that. And I think about this. Let's say you've just been paid, but your credit card and mortgage payment hasn't come out of your bank account. There's a timing issue. Your bank account looks nice and fat because your paycheck has gone in there. And you go, look, I'm up to X, whatever it might look like in your world. But in 2 days' time, you've got a mortgage and credit card bill to be paid that'll take it out and take it back down. So I think we had a budget surplus by looking at a very, very specific period of time. Oof. If you look at the bigger picture, I think the pattern of where we're at with our economy from a government spending perspective and tax receipt perspective is much less good than that.
Yep, got you. Moving forward in the essence of time, we've got a lot to go through today.
Got a year to cover, so what have we got, 365 days?
365 topics, cool. 10 minutes per topic, that sounds about right.
I could do that.
Okay, what about the US trade policy? Because that did have a somewhat of a shift at the start of the year with Canada and Mexico, I believe. Talk to our viewers.
Look, the nearshoring was one of the themes that we picked up on actually last year. Where we talked about the notion of manufacturing in Mexico in particular, the vulnerabilities of Chinese manufacturing through COVID, and then subsequently with the Suez Canal being closed, and then China being closed for various lockdowns, and then some trade squabble, shall we say. And I think a lot of companies have realized that really long, elongated supply chain has affected their ability to have products. Yeah, we talked about one of the German, I think it was Skoda. It wasn't this year, it was actually last year. Yeah, they had a whole, not a car park, but storage facility with tens of thousands of cars ready to sell. But they're all missing a particular chip that they're waiting on a delivery of. So that needed to be installed before that stock could be there sold in the market. And you think about the impact of that, it's really quite gnarly for you if you've got all your cash tied up holding stock that you can't sell because it's not finished. So long story short, nearshoring manufacturing in Mexico for the US market makes a lot of sense insofar as you haven't got to put anything on a boat because you've got a border, a very open border. I don't know if we're going to talk about that this year, but nonetheless, you can literally drive straight across the border with those goods for sale. The NAFTA agreement means that the trade tariff situation is also very favorable in that. And, in Mexico, you've got a swell of low cost, reasonably skilled labor, not ultra high-end type stuff like manufacturing iPhones, but certainly manufacturing to a reasonable standard there. So there was started to be a bit of a groundswell there. I suspect, that's what we've seen. But where it goes next year, I think, is going to be very different come January 20 with the Trump administration taking over the reins. We're going to see some very different trade going on. And countries like Canada and Mexico, which are part of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was an agreement set in play. I'm trying to think the president that actually put that into play. It'll come to me shortly. It's not a great deal for America. Yeah, it's a great deal for Canada and Mexico. And if we've got an America First policy, which I suspect we'll see out of the Trump administration, I'd expect to see some tariffs and some hammering going on in those markets to level the playing field, so to speak. Yep. So, been very, very interesting watching that trade move along. And I think we'll see very specifically next year the embryonic start to manufacturing back in the US again. And that will really level up, I think, the trade playing field.
Got you. One of the major themes we saw this year when we talk of themes would be, two things intertwined. That's the cost of living crisis, which, we're still struggling with here in Australia as well as in the US, and interest rates as well. We've seen interest rate cuts in the US. I think September was the first one, supersized 50 basis points. Here in Australia, nothing as of yet.
No, Australia's policy on interest rates, as we've gone through multiple times in this podcast, has been off the pace. I think, generally speaking, the US Federal Reserve called it very, very well. I think Jerome Powell's been exceptional as a central banker. His communication skills have been peerless, I think, in terms of making sure markets are across what their view is and why. And that's very important. Markets hate uncertainty. and the US markets responded very well to good guidance from the Fed. And we've seen a couple of cuts this year going into December, 65% probability that cut came through in December as well. So markets have kind of factored that in. I think we're going to see that slow down going into 25. Now, for Australia, remember, Dr. Philip Lowe.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. There'll be no interest rate rises in Australia until 2024. We called that very well, and obviously RBA got that very wrong. Michelle Bullock, I think, has actually done a reasonable job coming in, and I think has been under immense political pressure. What we have is a situation where we have a federal government that is spending, as we've alluded to previously, and they want the RBA to cut interest rates. But until you put a lid on the spending and injecting all of that new money into the economy, it's going to be a very tricky thing for the RBA to cut rates. They won't bend to political will, and I think Michelle Bullock's done a very good job of standing up to Dr. Chalmers and his desire to see that interest rate cut. And the downside to all of this, of course, is that anyone that's got a mortgage is stuck with higher repayments, which is a contributing factor to the cost of living crisis for people. And people do want to see those rates cut so that they can get some opportunity to breathe and have some financial relief. But the cost of living crisis has gone across the board. It's not just in property. It's been across almost everything. If you think about motor insurance, private health cover, the cost of petrol is still over $2.06 a litre today when I came out of the airport to fill up. The groceries, the cost of meat, everything is pretty damned expensive, and there's been no sort of relief through there. And every time the government introduces a policy like cost of living relief, that should be called, here's our policy for causing more inflation, because effectively you're providing more subsidy to put more money into the economy to then push into higher prices for longer for people, which requires the RBA to keep rates up higher. And the Hotel California continues for people where they can't get out of this cycle. And if you look alternatively, if you look inside the construction space, and I know we'll probably talk around property as we go through this. I was talking to someone the other day, developer of reasonable size. Now, 4 years ago, to build a two-bedroom apartment, his hard cost was about $285,000. 4 years later, it's nearly $600 and something thousand, and labour costs have been the major part of that, as indeed are raw material inputs too. So labour costs have gone up, which means people are earning more, but it's also costing more to make stuff. So the cost of the product is moving higher, which is inflationary, and you've got more dollars chasing that, which is also inflationary too. So we've got to take some fairly drastic measures, I think, to get wage growth under control, which is a bit of an oxymoron. We're talking about helping people out from a cost of living crisis. So how does cutting wage growth do that? Well, it starts to restrict the amount of money that's going into the economy. Also takes a little pressure off of homeowners through their mortgage having to bear the brunt of that money being pulled out of the economy too. So cost of living has been insane. And this year we've been on the road a little bit, and some of the pain that's out there is palpable. And it's so difficult having conversations with people that are on the wrong end of it, and they're genuinely struggling. I think to a conversation I had with somebody this year in, I think it was Dubbo, a farming couple, and they were selling stuff off like their horse float and trailers and different things to try and just get more money in the door to get by. And he said to me, look, I'm a good earner, I can work more. And that was his answer, just honest, hardworking people, I can work more. And it's like, how many more hours in the day can you really stuff in working wise before your health starts to suffer and then you're not able to support your family? So it's not that we're sitting in an ivory tower spouting economic theory. We get out in the trenches with people and see firsthand for real just what impact this cost of living crisis is having. Now, anecdotally, yesterday I was in Western Australia yesterday, and we had a couple of events over there. And at what point, I very rarely go out for breakfast, because obviously we have a household full of kids, so we usually have breakfast at home.
With chickens and ducks and all the eggs that come with that, right?
Without subjecting the rest of the world to my growing brood. And it was $22 for scrambled eggs on toast with a couple of slices of chorizo.
Yeah, that's light.
$22. When did that happen?
I expect to spend $30 a meal, and every time I go out for breakfast now, plus a coffee.
Wow.
Times 2 for the partner and I, $70.
It is crazy. So you look at that, and then you look around, and pretty much every cafe you see is still very, very well supported with people spending. So there is a cost of living crisis, but people are still spending. They're dipping into their savings for sure, or they're foregoing other things, particularly that desire perhaps to get into the property market to fund lifestyle now. So it is a big problem, and it is very real. And I've had some really difficult conversations this year with people, and they've impacted on me quite dramatically, and that's why we've introduced some new products to try and help those people.
Got you. Well, let's stay on the topic of food, and let's talk about the investigation that we saw into Woolies and Coles. So allegations of price gouging and, let's just say unfair play in the corporate space.
Yep.
What are your thoughts, AB? How do we recount that for our listeners?
Coles and Woolies have a massive dominant market share in Australia. In fact, if you look at Australia as an economy, we've got arguably some of the most monopolistic or duopolistic sectors in the world. We've got 2 airlines. We lost Rex this year, another insolvency, and that's perhaps something else we can talk about for a year in review. It's been a year of insolvencies. So many businesses have gone to the wall. So Rex went, which effectively leaves us with Qantas and Virgin. Qantas have, 78% of the market share, give or take.
They own Jetstar as well too,
and
right?
through Jetstar being the other brand. So they've got the market kind of sewn up. And if we look at the grocery area, we've really only got Coles and Woolies and Aldi as the third player in that space. With their banking, we've got 4 banks. So we've got this, with their energy, we've got 2 companies. So we've got this incredibly concentrated economy. And unfortunately, that does create an ability for profiteering. Now, I'll talk about airlines for a minute, and we can translate exactly the same thing across to the likes of Coles and Woolies. When you operate in a duopoly or a monopoly is where you've got one company that dominates in the airline industry, that's Qantas. In grocery, we've got a duopoly where there are 2 companies. So same problems,
Gotcha.
But 2 players. So if you look at Qantas and their pricing structure, and we did a really good deep dive on Qantas last year, and I've just finished reading Joe Ashton's book, The Chairman's Lounge. Highly recommend it. And when you read it, particularly as someone that, I spend a lot of time with Qantas, and I can't speak highly enough of their frontline staff, but when you see what corporate has done. So, I'm a platinum with Qantas. So you go in their special lounge, which is supposed to be the nice bit, not the Chairman's Lounge where all the pollies are. This is the platinum lounge of people that actually pay for their tickets and work hard.
Got you.
There's a urinal in the bathroom. It's been broken for 3 months.
Okay.
It's in Sydney Airport. And it's a crazy thing just to observe, but I thought, I wonder how long they're going to take to fix that. And it's been 3 months, it's still not fixed. And it's an absence of having to do anything because you're in such a strong price control space. You look at airfares. I was looking at going to Los Angeles, $16,000 for a business return to LA. It used to be 6, 7, maybe 8,000.
10 max, I would say, right?
Then it moved up to 10 to 12 in the post-COVID environment, and now it's at 16.
That's nuts.
And
That's
it's
expensive.
because they've got no competition on that route to the US.
Times 7 for you too, right? With all your family.
Yeah,
That's
this one's a work trip. I'm not
Okay.
in a hurry to take the tribe to Los Angeles particularly, but that notion that they can get away with it because there's no competition there, which is the only people that suffer are the consumer at the end of the day. Now, let's translate that into Coles and Woolies, which is, I guess, the point to which we're supposed to be speaking. So you've got these 2 organisations who have a duopoly. They control, a substantial, probably 90% of the grocery market between the 2 of them. And so there was a really good documentary on this I think it was on 60 Minutes earlier in the year, where the ACCC have got an enforcement arm for this, and they've done nothing for years. There's been no major fine. You've got misleading pricing where you go, this is 40% off today. Now it's 40% off the inflated price to bring it down to a normal price, which is deceptive and misleading. So this conduct has been going on for quite some time. And in the meantime, these are the companies that are all about virtue signaling. Woolies has gone green by getting rid of Endeavour, and there's all support for DEI and the Yes vote and all of these different things that these organisations have got behind politically because they're good corporate citizens, except for they're absolutely screwing the guts out of their loyal people that shop there week in and week out. So there is an element of price gouging that's gone on, and it's quite hard to sort of rationalise that in grocery, as we saw from the US election. Going after an industry that's got actually quite thin margins is quite hard. But nonetheless, the conduct of what's gone on there is not great. And we've spoken about Aldi. It's where I take 2 of my kids every Saturday for their cost of living experience and to learn a bit about life. And more people are making that realization that you can save significant money per week by grocery shopping there, get arguably, in some instances, significantly better products. And it's no frills. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to run a household and you're in some level of financial distress, getting a like-for-like product for less money makes an awful lot of sense. And we need more competition in our market to do that. Competition breeds efficiency. I love competition because if you're good at what you do, which in our business we are, you stand out and you do very, very well. But it means you can't be lazy and you can't be milking the cow.
And you also can't be doing the wrong thing either. Change of pace now, AB. Let's look overseas and let's talk about Israel and Palestine. So that's been an ongoing issue for most of this year, geopolitical conflict, an all-out war, effectively. US have been involved with intelligence and weapons and that kind of thing. It's been an interesting ride.
Look, it has, and it's one that had the potential to get very seriously out of control and kind of rein back in, at least for the moment, as we're speaking. And it's a tragedy that's been going on. I think there are still 67 hostages as we speak today that are still being held from the October 7th attacks. And look, it's a controversial thing. People see the response from Israel as being excessive. Other people say you've got a right to defend yourself, and I'm sure people sit somewhere in between. The reality is this conflict has seen an escalation. When you've had outgoing President Biden, and I'm sure we'll talk about the election in a few minutes' time. Did I win?
How can we not?
And
that's our closing message, surely.
Yeah, authorizing the use of long range, being pretty heavily involved in what's gone on there. And the US's support has not been as unequivocal as it typically has been backing Israel. They kind of supported and then they backed away a little bit, and I think part of that was the pre-election issue with the having to placate certain parts of their party. So the support hasn't been as unambiguous and resounding as it might be. They actually delayed providing particular weapons. I think they're 950 kilo bombs. They stalled on providing those in a way to try and slow the conflict down. So that's been a really interesting one. The introduction of Iran getting involved sort of forced America to have to put its shoulder to the wheel, which they did. They stepped up and did that for sure. It also highlighted how important weaponry is, and not just weaponry from an attack perspective, but a defense perspective. So Israel, for a number of years, has had its Iron Dome air defense system, which is its anti-missile system, which, given its track record, has been pretty effective at nullifying attacks from other countries. And it'll be very, very interesting to see when this is all said and done what the retooling looks like, certainly for Israel as they rebuild their up. So I think there's some opportunities in there for weapons manufacturers. I think you're also going to see the US spend a lot more on its military too. But it looks like we are creeping towards, as we're speaking, a ceasefire. And you would hope, given the representations made in the election campaign, that come January 20th, we're likely to see the Trump foreign policy get stuck into getting this resolved. And look, in all fairness to Trump at 45, not the incoming administration, people have criticized what their foreign policy really looked like. The other side of the coin is have a look up, and very few people will be aware of this because it didn't get any coverage in the media for whatever reason, were the Trump 45's administration's success at getting something across the line called the Abraham Accords, which was a peace agreement between Israel and nearly all of the major players in the Middle East. And I think there'll be enormous pressure put in by that new administration to get that accord squared away again and adhered to. And we all hope that we have a more peaceful world. I mean, we've had a couple of decent conflicts. Obviously, the war in the Ukraine also has been a major issue, and no one wants to see conflict and war. And let's hope we can get ourselves to a position where it resolves itself. But it's been a risk for markets. If you look at the way volatility shot up when Iran got involved, because you think, okay, this is on that. This has got the potential to go, no pun intended, but literally nuclear. We saw that big spike in the VIX, and then it fell away over the next few trading sessions. And that shows how fickle this is. And as an active trader, that ability to manage risk or indeed expose yourself to things like the volatility index when that foreign policy news kicks off and looks gnarly is a key skill to have.
Totally. Another economic powerhouse we need to talk about here is China, because unfortunately they have lost a fair bit of momentum and steam this year. We know their economy has slowed. I think their youth employment was at an their youth unemployment was at an all-time high, and they had stimulus packages which came out towards the back end of this year, which were significantly underwhelming. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, China's got problems. It's interesting, the People's Republic of China and the People's Republic of California have got two things in common, because with the Newsom legislation on low wages or higher wages for youths, it actually created higher unemployment for youths as well. So it's an interesting one to see across there. Getting back to the subject matter of China, I mean, the challenges are threefold. You've got demographic issues whereby you've got an aging population and a major shift in that. And the second thing is deflation, where you've got a drop in consumer spending. And so then, because there's no thirst for buying stuff, prices start to get discounted to move it. And when you get into that discounting cycle, it's very simple summary of economics. When you get into that discounting cycle and prices fall away, you remove any urgency from people to need to buy anything, because you'll wait till next week when it's cheaper, or even the week after, which slows purchasing down even more and becomes more and more deflationary. And the last one are the debt levels, because it's been a year of insolvency, I think would be an understatement when you look at companies like Evergrande, which is the biggest company in China, the house builder. House builder is an understatement. I mean, just behemoth developer, and their demise has gone a long way towards creating further debt in the economy within the banking sector, for example, where banks have lent against properties that have not been completed or haven't even started to be built yet, or are valuing up at substantially less than what they sold for, does create a real drag. And I think China is likely to have a pretty tough time under Trump 47 with the use of tariffs, which has been discussed. And China has been a powerhouse in terms of what it's done economically, military, its growth, its switch from being a rural to an industrial country. Seeing that pendulum swing a little bit, I don't know, is such a bad thing, because China's record on the environment, for example, and we live in an environment in the West where the lens must be net zero or low carbon emission or clean energy, or things that are gradually moving the needle in a positive way from a climate change and environment perspective. China's really no roads into that, and has quite clearly stated that it's got no desire to do that either. So maybe a slower economy and the need to get in tune with what the rest of the world is doing is probably a lesson that's a good thing for China.
They've been a little out of step, let's face it. Everywhere else at the start of the year was raising rates, and then maybe now some have started to cut, whereas China's been on the interest rate decline for quite some time to try and stimulate spending. Indeed.
And I mean, there are other risks too associated around China, of course. The prospect of the integration or reintegration of Taiwan into China again. They've made no secret about it. They want that as their end game, and maybe politically that might be quite hard to do over the next 4 years or beyond, depending on how long the new dynasty runs for in the White House. But that's also a major risk for markets and the economy. Taiwan being the world's largest DRAM or chip manufacturer. So if anything happens there, that could be tricky. And in fact, if you think about Taiwan specifically, one of the comments in the election campaign from President Trump was that that Taiwan needs to contribute more toward its defense. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and yet most of its defense costs are borne by the US. And this notion of why is the US underwriting everyone's ability to have secure borders, ironic when it doesn't have those in itself. Same with Germany and Russia. The US is funding Germany's contribution to NATO, and they're going, no, you got to start putting in. So that little murmur from Trump in the pre-election actually caused quite a sell-off in the NASDAQ that we saw, and I think that was probably, when was that? It was probably about, was it May, June, something like that? Might have been a bit later than that.
Maybe August, I think.
Maybe August, yeah. So we saw quite a significant retracement in the NASDAQ on the back of those tech companies selling off on the back of it.
That's right. I think it was a 2,000-point drop across 3 days. That was pretty hard. I remember that.
Yeah,
that hurt.
That'll clear your nostrils out, especially if you're trading with leverage.
That's right. Okay, moving on, AB. Let's get into some US politics, and we'll finish off this lovely broadcast for our listeners. Let's talk about, first and foremost, the Hunter Biden pardon. Speaking volumes for US politics, right?
Look, it does. I mean, it's and politics, just stepping back for a minute, has been a major factor this year. We talked about it being the year of insolvency. It's also been the year of elections, and I think we've had over half the world's population has gone to the election. We saw it in Russia. We've seen it in France, Germany, the UK, Mexico, India, where Modi narrowly got back in, and of course in the US. So a lot of the world has gone to vote, and there's been quite a change in the composition of world leadership, and maybe moved a little further away from the left back towards the center or beyond in some instances. And politics is a very, very divisive subject, and I think if we talk specifically to the US situation, it's especially divisive. It's been one of those tribal type environments, which is so sad that you're either over there or over here, and you can't have a conversation anywhere that sits in the middle. And America voted literally and emphatically when you see the Republican win on presidential level, Congress, and at the Senate. So all three levels, as well as the popular vote, is really, someone will know the statistic on this. I don't know when the last time all four of those got ticked over. I bet it was when Dukakis lost, which was a very unsuccessful campaign for the Dems back in the day. So there's been an emphatic change in vibe, so to speak. And I think people in general, and I guess you'd be very careful. My view is pretty clear. I try and be objective by looking at news from both sides of the line and try and formulate my own ideas. But this whole ideology and virtue signaling that really cost the Democrats the election comes as no surprise to anybody that's been objectively looking at what's gone on. Yet there's all this shock and horror that they didn't get the win. And it reflects, I guess, the media's perspective and narrative that they created in the run-in that, this is a joyous campaign and it's about change and it's about good versus bad and people that are law-abiding versus people that are not, and people that are for the people versus people that are for the rich. When you look at the wash-up of all of this, and in no particular order, it wasn't a joyous campaign when you refer to your opposition as a dictator or even Hitler, which is an extreme stance to take. It wasn't a campaign that was based on change, because the person that said, this is a campaign, this is all about turning the page, it's all about change. And so, well, what would you do differently? Oh, nothing, which was the answer that was given. And in fact, on the next chat show, that Harris went on, they got asked the question again in a slightly different way to say, look, you got a second chance at correcting it. So what would you do differently? Oh, nothing. So I'm not sure where the agent for change was supposed to sit. The characterizations that, the Republican Party is a party that's all about the big end of town is clearly not the case when you look at the $1.5 billion that was raised, some of which seems to have been raised illegally, I might add, for the Democrats' campaign as an insane fundraiser. But you look at the money people behind it, it's the people that control the society there to a very, very large extent. And ironically, the Republicans, supposedly the party of the higher echelons of society, has become the party of the people. And when you see the percentage of votes from particularly Latin American people, Latin American males, the black community, the working poor, people that are in low-income jobs, voted resoundingly, and that's why those swing states all went the way they did, for someone that could see and hear them rather than a party of elite that we don't really care about that, this is about. So it's a really divisive election. So let's get back to law, where obviously, other than being branded Hitler and a victim of an assassination attempt, President Trump was portrayed as the person that this is the convicted felon, noting, of course, that firstly, the law was changed in order to try and convict him, and you'll find that pretty much, 2 suits have been dropped, the other 2 will go away as well in the new year because they will get overturned because of what actually happened in the run into that. And against that backdrop, you've got an incumbent president who knows even where he's been for the last 6 months, because he certainly hasn't been at the White House making policy decisions.
Not at all.
He's been on the beach at Delaware or shuffling around to try and sabotage the Harris campaign to an extent, which was good work, I might add. You've got a situation where you've had someone come out, I will not. My whole political career has been based on honesty and upholding the law to protect American people. And this is all about upholding the law. And even a few months ago, we're saying, I will not pardon Hunter Biden. Well, there's a few things that have come out. Number one, the laptop turned out to be real. How come the media haven't done that? And I think the media in itself is getting a big wake-up call, and we'll talk about one of the social shifts if we can, which will be Joe Rogan. So the media's had a wake-up call that you can't propagate BS and hope people keep buying it. The story proved to be true, but no one wants to talk about it. And then the subsequent prosecution, which almost got put away with a plea deal, but fortunately got cracked back open, saying that is just not a plea deal that we're prepared to accept. Tax evasion, firearms for a party that's supposed to be tough on illegal firearms owning, etc. Throughout that time, Biden said, I will not pardon Hunter Biden. Guess what he did this week?
Pardoned him.
Pardoned his son. So it's the ultimate in hypocrisy. And I think people have had a guts full of that. And yet you've got somebody that's been portrayed as the black hat. And you go, okay, he pardoned his son-in-law's father, who actually did his time in jail before he got pardoned, or was in jail serving some time. So it's a slightly different set of circumstances. So that's been a massive thing. But it's been a good year for political fibbing or breaking promises. And our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, remember, it was never our intention to do that, but we didn't say we wouldn't do it, we just said it wasn't our intention. So there's some very nifty footwork used by politicians.
Few loopholes there.
You've got to be very, very careful. One of the big things I mentioned just in passing is in terms of media, and this year, and this ties in with elections, but it ties in with a broader issue, I think, for society, and that is that for quite some period of time, and I think something like 90% of journalists identify as left-leaning or Democrats in the US. And the emergence of Elon Musk, particularly through X, where it's provided, warts and all, a platform that everyone can have a say, the idea of being the town square where you can say your piece, has been quite interesting in terms of levelling the playing field, in terms of commentary of what's going on. Some of it's been quite gnarly. But we live in a world where people say gnarly things, and you've got the right to reply, defend yourself, etc., etc. But the real big game changer, and I think this is where you're going to see some really significant shifts, and this is an investment trade, so we'll tie this into I'm on a real weave at the moment. How am I going to bring this one back? Is legacy media, the big broadcasters, are losing enormous market share in terms of if you look at the viewing figures and the impact that they have, and they're losing that ground to long-form podcasts in particular, interview-type podcasts, I guess a little like this, maybe more highbrow, maybe less so, depending on which ones you're referring to.
Too true.
Whereby you can have a long, uninterrupted discussion around something and actually articulate your ideas. Joe Rogan's interviews with Elon Musk, with obviously President Trump, and even people like Bill Ackman, hedge fund manager, have been a revelation because they're long form. You can lock in and have a listen to it, and it's not targeting the bros. It's targeting people that want to actually hear what someone has to say unfiltered. Noting that Rogan was a Democrat that ended up supporting the Republican Party in this cycle says an awful lot. And I think the Trump interview got something obscene, like 38 million views inside 48 hours, whereas legacy media is maybe getting 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 people tuning into it.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see some structural weakness in some of those media companies as they regroup on the back of this and go, okay, we've lost the trust of our viewers because we called everything so wrong and so one-eyed. How do we try and regain this market share? And I don't know that you can. The world's moved on.
Well, it's going to be an interesting 2025 to say the least, and I think President Trump's inaugurated on January 13th, remember, or January 20th?
20th is when it all kicks off, and we've alluded to this, Mitch, multiple times this year. The one thing more than any single thing I would wish for is that it is a peaceful transition.
Totally.
And that America can get this chapter of divisiveness behind it, because what leads in America tends to propagate around the rest of the world, and we've seen evidence of that this year in Australia with some of the more extreme protests that we've seen. So if we see a little bit of a coming together, maybe a better economy that is more inclusive, which is ideally the platform that the incoming president's working toward, we may well see that. And I just hope that we don't see the civil unrest that we're expecting. And we see America resume its position as the world's superpower, growing economically, growing in terms of its standing around the world to ensure that we don't have further outbreaks of conflict, and those conflicts that are put to bed, and really to show the rest of the world what you can do if you have a vision to not accept a drift into a pathway that doesn't end in a good place. And seeing that win across the board, popular vote, presidential, Congress and Senate, is a very, very strong mandate to take that there. And let's hope we see the rest of the world look at this and go, okay, we can get our act together and apply some level of common sense to what we're doing and get things on a more even keel. And that's a really hard thing to say because I know it's politically quite divisive. but we'll see what the next 4 years have to say, and more importantly, we'll see what the next year has to say on the back of it. And I think anything would be better than where we're seeing that country right now.
Too true.
And the great thing about it is the stock market, which we continue to make a killing on.
That's right. Now, last but not least, before we wrap up for our listeners, the resurgence of cryptocurrency. It's back, baby.
Look, it is. And you know, the notion that, you know, Trump is pro-crypto, I think the step back that you have to take is that crypto is actually very highly correlated to the Dow and the S&P. We talked about the performance of those markets, and as a consequence, they've moved up, and you'd expect to see crypto go up on the back of it. So my view on it, I mean, it's a very big speculative tool, and my view hasn't overly changed. Probably cost me a few bucks by not being as invested in it as I could or perhaps should be. But I'm doing my thing that's in my lane that works for me and has done for an awful long time. I think, you know, crypto, as we've discussed previously, if it finds itself getting regulated in a slightly different way, and let's say it becomes gold backed, which we did a talk on actually this year. You know, we did a Bond Uni talk on that, I think earlier in the year.
Yep.
We also published a book this year as well. So
that's true. There it is right there.
You know, a gold backed crypto type currency would be a very interesting potential alternate to a global reserve currency, and maybe next year might start to see that mount up. But look, it's great to see people making money and doing something, and it's not luck. It's not wild speculation. People have taken a decision to take their hard-earned savings and expose it to, you know, a fairly volatile beast, and they've been rewarded for taking that action. And personally speaking, when I see people making money and improving their life, this isn't about the big end of town. This is about anybody who's had an opportunity to do this, and that's that ownership of your own financial future by making decisions and applying it. That's the thing that keeps us driving what we do in our business, which is helping everyday people create tomorrow's wealth today. Happens to be the stock market, happens to be crypto, happens to be in property, happens to be in other things that we do. That's a win across the board because it's improved people's lives, and that's the most important thing.
Beautiful. There's our year in review, AB. Merry Christmas, and hope our listeners have enjoyed.
I hope our listeners have too. I mean, this is fifth year.
Fifth year in review.
And so, you know, we've put a lot of effort into this, and we've got a very loyal following of people that listen to us week in, week out, and I truly hope that what we say and do on some level makes sense. And even if you don't agree with everything that we say and do, you're not supposed to agree with everything. If it just gets you thinking for yourself and maybe looking at things through a different lens, that's a good thing. But if you are someone that follows us, I'll ask this one outright. Take a couple of minutes right now to give us a review and a rating on this podcast series. And it's so important in today's cluttered world that the people that consume this information share their thoughts and views with the broader consuming public out there, so we can have more people hooking into this material and ideally helping set them up for a better financial future too. So I'd ask that for you. Take a minute now. Get that 5-star rating in there. Tell us what you've enjoyed most about what we've covered this year, and keep tuning in. But make sure you give us a review and a rating. It's such an important thing for us to get a broader message out there. And it's very rare, Mitch, I ask people for anything, but that's one thing in this seasonal time of goodwill. If you could do that for us, we'd really appreciate it. And as always, we look forward to hosting you next Monday and then into season 6 next year. Wow, season 6, that's scary.
Indeed it is. Thank you very much, AB. Cheers.
My pleasure, anytime. There you have it, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, hit the notification button. We'll look forward to hosting you next week.